"Smile, Miss Quail, and hold your tongue." The Duke of Ravenscar said it without turning his head, his voice pitched beneath the chime of silver on porcelain so that only she might catch it. He did not look at her. He looked at the man across the table, and he smiled the smile he had worn all evening. A thing assembled out of duty and good bones, handsome and shut as a strongbox. Honoria Quail smiled too, because she had been ordered to, and because a companion who valued her bread did as she was bid. She folded her hands in her lap where the candlelight could not reach them, and felt her own nails press 4 small crescents into her palm. The dining room at Ravenscar was warm as a kept hothouse, every long window thrown open to the July dusk, and not a breath of air coming in for the trouble. Beeswax candles guttered in their branches. The smell of turbot in lobster sauce hung over the cloth, rich and faintly cloying, and somewhere beneath it she caught the green bruised scent of the lime walk drifting up from the dark gardens. "Hold my tongue," she murmured back, just as low, her lips barely moving over the words. "Of course, Your Grace. I shall be as decorative and as silent as the Epern." "You may aspire to the Epern," he said. "It has never once contradicted me." It was not, she thought, a promising beginning to an evening upon which a great deal apparently hung. She had been 3 weeks at Ravenscar, 3 weeks companion to the Dowager Duchess, his grandmother, who at this moment sat at the foot of the table in grey silk and a turban the colour of a thundercloud, missing nothing. 3 weeks was long enough to learn the shape of the house, and not nearly long enough to learn the shape of the man who owned it. Gideon, Duke of Ravenscar, was 28 and carried himself like a man of 50 who had been handed the keys too soon and meant never to drop them. He rode out before the household stirred. He answered his own correspondence. He had, in 3 weeks, addressed perhaps 40 words to her, and 30 of them had been instructions. Tonight the instructions had a reason, and the reason sat opposite, working his way through a second helping of the turbot with the placid greed of a man who had never once been refused anything. Lord Holloway was broad and pink and beautifully dressed, his waistcoat a sweep of saffron silk straining at its buttons, his rings catching the light each time he lifted his fork. He had arrived that afternoon in a travelling coach with his crest upon the door, and he would leave it at first light for Brighton, and the sea bathing his physician had urged on him. Tonight was the whole of it. Honoria had gathered, from the careful way the Duke had not explained anything to anyone, that whatever the Duke wanted from Lord Holloway he must get between the soup and the sweet, or not at all. "I will say this for the country," Lord Holloway announced, to the table at large. "It does sharpen the appetite. One eats like a labourer, and feels not a particle of shame." He laughed at his own wit, a wet, comfortable sound, and the 2 other guests, a thin baronet and his thinner wife, laughed obligingly along. "We are honoured you find our air so improving," said the Duke. "Air, and quiet, and no one wanting anything of one." Holloway set down his fork. "That is the trouble with town, Ravenscar. A man cannot cross St. James's without some ragged creature or other thrusting a hand at him. I have made it my settled rule never to give a farthing in the street. Encouragement, that is all it is. Encourage the idle, and you breed more idleness. It is as plain as arithmetic." Honoria smiled at the Epern. The Epern was a monstrous silver thing in the shape of a fountain that did not fountain, crusted with silver grapes and silver vine leaves, and she fixed her eyes upon a single grape and thought about the price of bread. "Just so," said the thin baronet. "Quite so," said his wife. "Some, of course," Holloway went on, warming to it, spreading his pink hands, "would have us pour out money on cottages and coals and I know not what. Schools for children who'd do better at the plough. Physic for those who've brought their ailments on themselves. Sentiment. All of it. The labouring poor are poor, my dear Duke, because Providence has fitted them for nothing finer, and the kindest thing a Christian can do is leave them to the station that suits them." The Duke's hand was perfectly steady on the stem of his glass. "You take an interest in the question," he said. "I take an interest in not being gulled. I have tenants, sir. I know the breed. Holloway leaned back, and his chair complained. Give a cottager a new roof, and within the 12th month he'll have let it rot to spite you, and his wife breeding again besides, and another half-dozen mouths for the parish to feed. Charity is a bucket with no bottom. The sooner the new measures pass, and the rates are cut, the better for every man of sense. Honoria's smile had gone somewhere very far away. She was aware of the Duke beside her, of the line of his shoulder in dark blue superfine, of the warning he had laid down not 10 minutes since, like a man chalking a line on a floor. Smile and hold your tongue. She understood, now, why, whatever he wanted of Holloway, a name, a vote, a signature on some paper that would do the village good, he meant to coax it out by flattering this man into amiability, and a companion's opinion of the labouring poor would weigh in that scale exactly nothing, and might tip it the wrong way entirely. She knew all this. She held her tongue. She held it through the removal of the turbot and the arrival of a saddle of lamb that the footman carried in like an offering. She held it while Holloway described, with relish, a family he had turned off his land at Ladyday for the crime of falling behind in a hard winter. She held it while the Dowager Duchess at the foot of the table watched the whole performance with eyes like polished jet and said not one word, which was, Honoria was learning, the Dowager's most dangerous mood. She held it, and felt the holding cost her something she could not afford to keep paying. And then Lord Holloway, carving himself a great pink slab of the lamb, happened to mention the name of a village she knew. Nettlecombe, he said. You'll know the place, Ravenscar. It marches with your western farms. A perfect sink of idleness. The living's worth next to nothing, and the last incumbent there, some grasping parson, spent his whole life begging coals and blankets off his betters for a parcel of people who'd sooner drink than dig. Drank himself into his grave at the finish, by all accounts. There's your charitable clergyman for you. The room was very warm. A moth had found its way in through the open window and was beating itself softly against the nearest candle, and Honoria watched it, and she thought of her father. She thought of her father walking 4 miles in the sleet to sit up with the Tranter children when the fever was in the cottages, and coming home with his boots cracked through, and saying nothing of it. She thought of the coals he had begged. Yes, begged. Gone hat in hand to men exactly like this one, and swallowed his pride for the warmth of other people's hearths. She thought of how he had worn himself thin to the bone in the service of Nettlecombe, and had not drunk anything stronger than the parish's bad cider in his life, and how he had gone from her this past winter quietly, and without complaint, worn out, used up, given away. She felt the Duke's eyes on her now. She felt him know, somehow, in the half-second before she opened her mouth, that the chalked line was about to be crossed. Smile, Miss Quail, he said again, very low. I find I cannot, Your Grace, she said. I have not the gift for it that the company has. And then she set down her fork, and she lifted her chin, and she said quite a lot. Lord Holloway, you asked the Duke whether he knew Nettlecombe, and I will save his Grace the trouble of answering, for I know it better than any soul at this table. I was born in its vicarage. I learned my letters at its font and my catechism in its draughty pew, and I knew every cottage on the road you were so lately pleased to call a sink of idleness, knew them by the names of the people in them, which is more, I think, than you can say of your own. A footman, halfway through pouring, stopped pouring. You speak of a parson who begged coals, she went on, and her voice did not shake, which surprised her, for the rest of her was shaking. That parson was my father. He begged. Yes, he begged the way a man begs who has no pride left to spend because he has spent it all on other people. He walked into the cold so that children he had christened might have a fire, and he asked men richer than himself for the means to do it, and when they refused him, as you, my lord, would so plainly have refused him, he went without his own dinner and gave them his. You say he drank himself to his end. He did not. He wore himself to nothing, carrying a burden men like you are too comfortable to lift, and he is gone this winter past. And I will not sit at any table, however fine. and hear his memory used to garnish your contempt. Nobody moved. The thin baronet's wife had a forkful of lamb suspended halfway to her open mouth. "You called the poor idle," Honoria said. "I have nursed them. I have sat up with them through fevers that took the strong and spared the wicked with no regard for either, and I never once met the idleness you speak of so readily from a chair you have not risen out of all evening. I met work. I met work that began before light and ended after dark and earned, in a good year, the price of the wine in your glass. You say charity is a bucket without a bottom. My lord, I should be glad to know what you imagine the alternative to be, that a man who cannot feed his children should, what? Apologize to you for the inconvenience of their hunger? Provide a tidier example of want that does not trouble your digestion?" She drew a breath. She was distantly aware that she had ruined herself, that there would be no character given her now, that she would be on the road by morning with her box and her father's books and nowhere on earth to take them, and she found she did not care. Not in that moment. Not with the moth still beating at the flame, and her own heart beating with it. "You make a settled rule never to give a farthing in the street," she said. "I congratulate you on your consistency. It must be a great comfort to be so certain that every empty hand is a fraud, for it spares one the labor of looking at the face above it. I cannot afford such certainty. I have looked at the faces. They are not idle, my lord. They are tired. There is a difference, and it is the whole of the difference, and I am very sorry to have detained the table while I explained it." She stopped. The silence that followed had a texture to it, like cold marble under the palm. Somewhere far off in the house a clock was striking the hour, each note dropping into the quiet and sinking, without a ripple. Lord Halloway's pink face had gone a curious mottled colour, the saffron waistcoat rising and falling with his breath. The Dowager Duchess at the foot of the table had set down her glass, and the Duke of Ravenscar was looking at Honoria as though he had never in his life seen her before. She made herself meet his eyes, ready for the cold fall of his anger, ready to be dismissed in front of the company with a single quiet word, for she had defied him, plainly, at his own table, with the man he needed sitting opposite, turning the colour of a brick. "Well," said Lord Halloway, recovering his voice, which came out high and offended. "Well, I am sure I never expected to be lectured on Christian charity by a paid companion of all the Ravenscar. I must say, the management of your household is your own affair, but a man might expect to dine without being set upon by the help." The Duke was silent for a moment longer. Then he turned from Honoria to his guest, and he set down his own fork with great deliberation. And he said, "She is right." The words fell into the room like a stone into a still pond. "I beg your pardon," said Halloway. "She is right," the Duke said again, and his voice was not raised, and it did not need to be. "In every particular. I have been sitting at this table for the better part of 2 hours, my lord, smiling at you and holding my tongue, because I wanted a thing of you, and believed I could only have it by agreeing with sentiments that turn my stomach. That was poorly done of me. Miss Quail has more courage at a dinner than I have managed, and a good deal more honesty, and every word she said is one I should have said myself an hour ago, and lacked the spine to." Honoria stared at him. The whole table stared at him. "The living of Nettlecombe is in my gift," the Duke went on, "and the cottages on the western farms are mine, and they are a disgrace, and I have known it, and I have let other business crowd the knowledge out, because the mending of them is slow and dull, and wins a man no friends in Lord Halloway's drawing-room. That ends. As to your new measures, my lord, the ones that would cut the rates and turn the burden of a hard winter onto the backs of the people least able to bear it, I had thought to hold my peace on them, tonight, and earn your goodwill, and trade it later for some small advantage. I find I would rather not." He smiled, and for the first time all evening it reached as far as his eyes, and it was not a comfortable thing to see. "You may carry that to Brighton with you, and into the lobby beyond, and make of it what you will." "You cannot be in earnest," Halloway sputtered. "I am very seldom anything else," said the Duke. "It is my chief failing. Miss Quail would tell you I have no conversation at all. It was so nearly a jest, and so plainly not one he was accustomed to making, that Honoria felt it land in her chest like a misstep on a stair. Lord Holloway rose. He rose the way a large affronted man rises, with much scraping of the chair and clutching of the napkin, his rings flashing. "I shall order my coach for tonight," he said, "rather than impose upon a house where the servants are encouraged in insolence and the master abets them. Good God, Ravenscar! Your father would have horsewhipped the chit and apologized to his guest." "My grandfather might have," said the Duke, evenly. "My father would have agreed with her, and then apologized to no one, which I see now is the better course, and I am sorry to have come to it so late. Bishop will have your coach brought round. I wish you a smooth road and a calmer sea than you deserve." And that, more or less, was the end of the dinner. What followed Honoria experienced as if from a little distance, the way one watches a scene through rain on glass. Lord Holloway swept out. The thin baronet and his thinner wife made their flustered excuses and were gone within the quarter hour, the wife casting back over her shoulder a look of such avid scandal that Honoria knew the whole of 3 counties would have the tale by Sunday. The footman cleared the abandoned lamb. The candles burned lower, and the moth at last found the flame and was gone in a small bright spit of light. And Honoria sat among the wreckage of the most expensive meal she had ever ruined and waited, with a strange calm, to be told to pack. The Dowager Duchess was the first to speak. She had not moved through the whole performance, neither during Honoria's speech nor during her grandson's, and she did not move now, save to turn her head a few degrees, the grey turban catching the light. Her face was a fine ruin of a face, beautiful still in the architecture of it, the cheekbones and the dark unsoftened eyes, and entirely impossible to read. "Miss Quail," she said. "Madam," Honoria's voice came out steadier than she felt, "I am aware I have disgraced your table. I will be ready to leave whenever it is convenient. I ask only, I should be grateful for a day to write to my mother's cousin in Wells, that I may have an address to be turned out to." "You assume," said the Dowager, "that you are to be turned out. I defied his grace before his guest. I drove Lord Holloway from the house. I cannot imagine the arrangement surviving it." "No," the Dowager agreed. "Neither can I imagine it. It is the most extraordinary thing I have witnessed in 40 years of dining, and I have dined with 3 prime ministers and a Russian princess who threw a soup tureen." She picked up her glass again, turned it in the candlelight, and did not drink. "Gideon, have you taken leave of your senses?" "Very possibly, ma'am," said the Duke. "You wanted Holloway's interest. You have wanted it for a month. You arranged this entire wretched dinner to flatter it out of him, and you have just thrown it into the fire and the man after it. I have. For the sake of a parson's daughter and a row of cottages." "For the sake," said the Duke quietly, "of being able to look at myself while I shave." He rose, and he crossed to the open window, and stood with his back to the room, looking out at the dark mass of the lime walk, where the night air moved at last, too late to do the dinner any good. The candlelight caught the edge of him, and left the rest in shadow. "I have been holding my tongue for 4 years, grandmother, since the title came to me. I have smiled at men I despise, and agreed with words that shamed me, and called it duty, and told myself it was the price of getting good done quietly. And tonight, a woman who has been in this house 3 weeks, and owns, I should think, 2 gowns and a box of her father's sermons, looked at the same bargain I have been making, and refused it in front of everyone, and was right to. So," he turned. "No, ma'am. I have not taken leave of my senses. I rather think I have just recovered them, and I find the sensation very strange, and I should like everyone to stop looking at me as though I have caught a fever." Honoria discovered that she had risen from her chair without knowing she meant to. "Your Grace," she said. "I cannot let you," she stopped, hunting the words. "What I said for my father, and for those people, and I do not take back a syllable of it. But I would not have you ruin a month's careful work on my account. I am nobody. The cottagers need a friend in the lobby more than they need my pride. If an apology to Lord Holloway would mend it, if my leaving would mend it, then let me be the one to pay. I am cheaper than his goodwill." The Duke looked at her across the disordered table, across the guttering candles and the abandoned silver, and something in his shut, handsome face came open by a fraction, like a door left on the latch. "That," he said, "is precisely the bargain I have just sworn off. You will forgive me if I decline to begin again within the half hour. But, Miss Quail—" He inclined his head, the smallest of bows, grave and oddly formal amid the ruin. "You will oblige me very greatly by going up to bed and not packing anything. We will speak in the morning. There is a matter I wish to put to you, and I find I cannot frame it tonight, having mislaid, as my grandmother observes, my senses." The ghost of that uncomfortable smile again. "Smile, if it suits you. Hold your tongue, if it does not. I have learnt this evening that I am safer hearing what you actually think." The Dowager Duchess made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, and set down her untasted glass at last, and rose in a whisper of grey silk. 40 years, she said, to no one in particular, and I am to be astonished at my time of life. Come, Miss Quail. You will give me your arm up the stairs, and you will not say one further word tonight, for I am an old woman, and my heart has had all the exercise it can bear. But as Honoria came to her, the dowager's jet-dark eyes moved over her face, slow and weighing. And there was something in them that was not anger at all, and that Honoria, 3 weeks in the house, and no nearer to reading any of these people, could not begin to name. She lay awake a long time in the narrow companion's bed under the eaves, with the window open to the warm summer dark, and the smell of the limes coming in at last, and she did not pack, and she did not sleep, and she turned over and over in the close heat the one question she could not lay down. What in heaven's name was the matter the Duke of Ravenscar wished to put to her in the morning, and why? Lying there, with everything lost, and nothing yet decided. Did she feel less like a woman ruined than like a woman who had, after a year of holding her tongue, finally and dangerously been heard? She woke to a house already at work below her, the scrape of a hearth being raked out, a maid's pattens clicking across the stable yard cobbles, the long sweet whistle of a stable boy who had not heard last night's news and had nothing to be solemn about. The light came in at the open window thin and gold, the way July light does before the heat finds its feet, and the limes were full of starlings. For one half-waking moment Honoria forgot. Then she remembered all of it at once, the way one remembers a fall by the bruise, and she lay quite still and waited for her heart to settle. She had not packed. That was the first thing she did. Before she could think better of it, she got up, and she did not pack, which felt, in the grey practical hours, like the boldest thing she had ever done, bolder even than the speech. To leave the box empty was to take the Duke at his word, and she was not at all sure she had the right. A knock came before she had finished pinning her hair. It was Suki, the under-housemaid, round-eyed and breathless with the importance of her errand, twisting her apron in 2 reddened hands. "His Grace's compliments, miss. And would you come down to the library when you're dressed? And the Dowager Duchess is to be there too. And," Suki leaned in, unable to help herself, dropping her voice to the thrilled hush of the servants' hall. "Is it true, miss, that you told my Lord Holloway he were no Christian, and the Duke said you was right, and his lordship went off in the dark, with his coach not half-packed, and the cook's good lamb gone cold on the dish?" "It is very nearly true," said Honoria, and felt the blood come up in her face. "Though I did not say he was no Christian. I left him to settle that with his own conscience. Cook says you're the talk of 3 parishes already." Suki said it with naked admiration, as though Honoria had grown wings. "Cook says there's not been such a dinner at Ravenscar since the old Duke's day, and she's that pleased she's doing you a coddled egg special." A coddled egg, Honoria thought, washing her hands in the cool water of the basin. The wages of rebellion. She dried her fingers on the rough towel, smelled the lavender the linen maid pressed into the press, and went down to learn what the Duke of Ravenscar wished to put to her, with her chin up and her stomach somewhere about her shoes. The library faced east and held the morning. It smelled of old leather and beeswax, and the dry paper smell of a great many books no one had opened in a long while, and under it, faint through the propped sash, the green breath of clipped box from the parterre. The Duke stood at the long table with a quantity of papers before him, in riding dress, his coat dark with the sweat of an early gallop, his hair still disordered by the wind. He had been up for hours. The dowager sat in a tall chair by the cold hearth, upright as a fire iron, her hands folded over the head of an ebony cane she carried more as a scepter than a support. Miss Quail. The Duke straightened. You did not pack. I was instructed not to, Your Grace. And you obey instructions now? This is a great improvement since yesterday. It came out level, with no smile to soften it, and only the faint lift at the corner of his mouth told her it was meant for a jest. She was so unprepared for it that she nearly smiled back before she caught herself, and she saw him mark the near smile, and something behind his grave face was quietly pleased to have provoked it. I obey them when they suit my conscience, Your Grace. I find that is the only honest rule. You will recollect it did not serve you very well at dinner. No, he agreed. It did not. He gestured her to a chair, and waited until she had taken it, and the dowager's dark eyes went between the two of them like a woman watching a needle pass back and forth through cloth. I will be plain, Miss Quail, because I am told I have no other manner. Last night you did in 2 minutes what I have failed to do in 4 years. You told a powerful, comfortable man the truth, to his face, at a cost to yourself, and you did not flinch from the cost. I have spent 4 years not flinching from anything except that. I lost you Lord Holloway's interest. You did. He set both hands flat upon the papers, and I have lain awake half the night being glad of it, which is a novel sensation, and one I should like to understand. Here is the matter. These cottages on the western farms, Nettlecombe Way, are mine, and they are in the state you described, and worse. I do not know the people in them. I have never known them. My agent knows their rents and their arrears, and nothing else, and my agent is a careful man, who has been taught that a careful man does not look too closely at what closeness would cost to mend. He lifted his head, and the directness of his look was almost too much to meet. You know them, by name. You said so, and I believe you. I want to put them right, and I have not the first idea how to begin, and I am asking you to show me. The clock on the chimney-piece ticked into the silence. Out in the parterre a gardener's shears went snick, snick along the box, patient as a heartbeat. Your Grace, Honoria said carefully, I am a paid companion. I sought your grandmother's wools and read her the court journal, and walk a pace behind her. What you describe is the work of an agent, or a steward, or a wife. It is not the work of a companion, and you must know what the county will say of a duke who takes his grandmother's companion about the cottages in an open gig. The county, said the Dowager Duchess, speaking for the first time, will say a very great deal, and most of it will be wrong, and all of it will be said whether you go in the gig or stay in the still room. She turned the ebony cane a quarter turn under her hands. I am not yet so feeble that I cannot sit in a gig myself, Miss Quail, and lend the proceeding the only thing it wants, which is my disagreeable old face beside yours. If I go, it is a charitable expedition of the family, conducted under my patronage, and the county may choke on its own gossip. If you go alone with my grandson, it is a scandal. Therefore, I shall go. I have not been to Nettlecombe in 11 years, and I dare say the road has not improved, and neither have I, so we shall suit. Honoria looked from the old woman to the young man, and understood that the thing had been decided between them before she came down, and that she was being offered not a request, but a refuge dressed as employment, a way to stay, with her honor propped on the dowager's arm and her father's people the better for it. Her eyes stung, unexpectedly, and she looked hard at the snicking shears beyond the window until the sting passed. "Then I will show you," she said. "On one condition, Your Grace. You will not begin a thing you mean to leave half-mended when the next dinner makes it inconvenient. These are not a project to be taken up for the salving of your shaving glass and laid down again. If you go to Nettlecombe, you go to stay the course, however slow and dull, however few friends it wins you in Lord Halloway's drawing-room. Your own phrase, sir. I will not have their hopes raised to be dropped. They have had quite enough of that." For a moment he said nothing. Then he inclined his head, the small grave bow he had given her over the ruined table the night before. "You drive a hard bargain for a woman who owns 2 gowns. 3, Your Grace, if one counts the one I do not wear. And I learnt to drive a bargain from a man who haggled for other people's coals. It is the only inheritance he could leave me, and I find it wears better than plate." That reached him. She saw it reach him, saw the shut, handsome face open by that same fraction, the door left on the latch, and she thought, with a small cold flutter of warning beneath her ribs, that it would be a very great deal safer for them both if it did not. They might have gone that very morning, but the morning had other intentions, and they arrived in a travelling chaise at 11:30 in the shape of the Duke's cousin. Honoria heard the wheels on the gravel from the morning room, where she sat winding the dowager's grey wool into balls, and she heard the bustle of an arrival that had not been looked for, Bishop's measured tread quickening, a footman sent running, the great door opening on the white blaze of the noon. Then a voice came across the hall, light and unhurried and pitched to carry, the voice of a man who had never in his life had to raise it to be heard. "No, no, don't disturb him. I know the way to my own cousin's library. Bishop, I have been finding it since I was in Nankine's. Is my aunt well? And tell me," the voice dropped, warm with confiding amusement, and yet somehow still perfectly audible, "is it true what they are saying at the Cock in Marlbury, that Ravenscar set the dogs on poor old Halloway over the soup? I had it from a postboy. I have come 30 miles on the strength of a postboy." The Dowager Duchess, across the morning room, set down her embroidery with great deliberation. "Crispin," she said, to no one, in the tone of a woman naming a draught she had felt come under the door. Mr. Crispin Vane came into the morning room a moment later, and he was, Honoria saw at once, beautiful. Beautiful the way the Epernay was beautiful. All bright worked surface and cold weight beneath. He was perhaps 30, slim and golden and exquisitely dressed in dove grey, that had never seen a speck of road dust, with a face that smiled before it had decided whether it was pleased, and eyes the pale clear blue of a winter sky. He kissed his aunt's cheek. He did not look at Honoria, which was its own kind of looking. He placed her in a single flick of those pale eyes, somewhere below the embroidery silks and above the coal scuttle, and dismissed her there. "Aunt, you look magnificent and furious, which is how I like you best. Where is the prodigal?" "I am told he has discovered a conscience. I came at once. One does not like to think of a duke alone with a new conscience. They are such delicate things, like a first horse, apt to bolt and take the rider with them." He drew off his gloves finger by finger. "Who is to talk him out of it, if not his own family?" "No one is to talk him out of it," said the Dowager. "Sit down, Crispin, and stop performing. You are not at the Cock now. I never perform, aunt, I converse. It is a lost art, and I am its last practitioner." He sat, arranging the long grey legs, and at last let his gaze come to rest on Honoria, with an air of having only that instant noticed the furniture had a person in it. "And this will be the companion. The famous companion. The one who lectured Halloway on the Sermon on the Mount, between the fish and the joint." He smiled, and it was a very practised, very pleasant smile, and it did not warm 1 degree of the winter in his eyes. "My dear young woman, you have made yourself the most talked of creature in the West Country in a single evening. I do hope you understand what that is worth." "I understand what it cost, sir," said Honoria. I had not thought it worth anything at all. No, I don't suppose you had. Something flickered behind the pleasant face. A brief, cool assessment. The look of a man revising a figure upward in a ledger. How refreshing. The Duke came in then, and the temperature of the room changed, and Honoria, winding wool, holding her tongue as she had been taught, and was now learning to choose, watched the two cousins greet one another, and understood that she was seeing the whole of something, if she could only read it. Crispin, the Duke did not smile. You have made good time. I take it the post boys of 3 counties are in full cry. Inglorious voice, dear fellow. You are quite the Jacobin this morning. I had to come and see it for myself. Crispin spread his hands, the picture of fond concern. Gideon, a word to the wise, from the one man living who has nothing to gain by lying to you. Halloway is not a fool to be insulted and forgotten. He carries the vain interest in his pocket. Our interest, cousin, yours and mine, the name we share, into a division that sits in 3 weeks' time. The measures go forward whether you smile on them or spit on them. The only question your charming theatricals have settled is whether the Duke of Ravenscar shall be inside the door when they pass, with a hand on the thing, or out in the cold being righteous with a parson's daughter. I know which your father would have chosen. My father, said the Duke, would have agreed with the parson's daughter. We established that last night. You are behind the news, Crispin. I am never behind the news. I am merely ahead of the regret. The cousin's voice stayed light, but the pale eyes had gone flat and still, and for one unguarded instant Honoria saw straight through the dove, grey charm to the thing beneath, which was not fond at all, and was not concerned at all, and which had ridden 30 miles on a postboy's word, not to save the Duke from his conscience, but to find out, with great urgency, exactly how much that conscience was going to cost. She bent her head to the wool before he could catch her watching. Those measures matter to you, she said, and had not meant to say it, and could not, now, hold it. The room went quiet. Crispin turned his head to her slowly, as a cat turns at a small sound in the grass. I beg your pardon? The measures, sir, the cutting of the poor rates. You speak of them as a family interest and a division in 3 weeks, but you ride 30 miles in the heat over a postboy's gossip, and a man does not do that for a vote he is sure of. Honoria kept her hands moving, kept her voice even, the way her father had taught her to speak to a frightened horse or a cornered creditor. It is your money in it, isn't it? Somewhere you have lent on the strength of those rates being cut, or you have bought on it, and if His Grace stands up in the wrong lobby, it is not the family name that suffers, but your own pocket. That is why you came. Mr. Crispin Vane looked at her for a long moment. The pleasant smile did not move, but everything behind it had gone hard and cold and watchful, and the silence stretched until the dowager's mantel clock filled it tick by careful tick. Aunt, he said at last, lightly, not taking his eyes from Honoria. Wherever did you find her? She is wasted on your wools. He rose, smoothing the dove grey, and the warmth came back into his voice like sun returning to a meadow, and it was somehow worse than the cold had been. You are very clever, Miss Quail. I will pay you that. But cleverness is a poor investment for a young woman with 3 gowns and no friends, and I have watched a great many clever people learn it too late. Do let me give you, free of charge, the only sound counsel you will have in this house. A companion's whole fortune is her character, and character is the easiest thing in the world to lose. One unguarded evening. One word in the wrong ear. One letter that says the wrong thing to the wrong cousin in Wells. He drew on his gloves. Smile, Miss Quail. Hold your tongue. I am told it is the house motto. And he bowed to her, very correctly, and the correctness was a threat with its hat in its hand, and he went out to find his old rooms made ready. Honoria discovered that the grey wool had snapped clean through between her fingers. He named Wells, she said quietly to the dowager. I spoke of my mother's cousin in Wells only last night, at the table. How does he? Crispin knows a great many things he ought not, said the dowager, and forgets nothing, and that is the whole of him in one sentence. Mend your wool, child. But the old woman's jet eyes had narrowed on the door her great-nephew had closed, and her mottled hands had tightened on the ebony cane. And Honoria understood that the warning had not been only for her. They went to Nettlecombe the next morning after all, in the heat haze of an early start, the gig wheels raising a long pale plume of dust on the western road, and the hedgerows white with the dust of a fortnight without rain. The dowager rode in the gig, under a parasol the colour of a thundercloud, magnificent and disagreeable and unanswerable, and the Duke rode beside on a tall grey, and Honoria sat with the basket of such things as could be assembled in a night's notice: bread, a ham, a roll of flannel, a paper of tea, the dowager's own physic chest plundered without ceremony, and her heart climbing into her throat with every furlong nearer home. She had not been back since the winter. She had not thought she could bear it. She found, when the squat grey tower of the church came up over the rise, with the heat shimmering off the fields beyond, and the smell of hot hay and dry chalk coming up from the road, that she could bear it, and could not at once, both together, and that the Duke had reined the grey back to ride level with the gig, and was watching her with a gravity that asked nothing, and noticed everything. "You need not speak," he said. "We are not at dinner. There is no one here to be improved by your eloquence except myself, and I am already half reformed, which is the most dangerous condition a man can be in." She gave a small wet laugh in spite of herself. "Is it, your grace? Wholly the worst. A wicked man is at peace, and a good man is at peace. But a man halfway between them is fit company for no one, and apt to make speeches at the breakfast table about cottages." He looked away, out over the parched fields, and his profile against the white sky was younger than she had yet seen it. "My grandmother has stopped speaking to me in anything but proverbs. I take it as a sign of progress." It was not a great jest. But he had made it for her, deliberately, to give her something to hold against the rise of the church tower, and she understood that, and the understanding was more dangerous than the joke. She looked at the basket in her lap so that he should not see what was in her face. The cottages were worse than her memory, and worse than her words. The Duke went into them one by one, ducking his tall head under the low lintels, and Honoria went before him with the names. "This is the Tranter cottage, your grace. 3 children of it had the fever the year you came into the title. This is old Sarah Coombe, who plaited rush all her life, and cannot now see the rushes." And she watched a man who had never in his life been at a loss stand at a loss in a doorway, with the smell of damp earth floors and tallow smoke and want all about him, and she watched the want of it go into him, and lodge there, and she thought, "Now you cannot unknow it. Now it is yours." It was in the Tranter cottage that the thing happened. The Duke had crouched to speak with the eldest girl about the broken roof, gravely, as though she were a magistrate, and not a child of 10, with bare feet. And the mother, flustered past sense by a Duke beneath her dripping thatch, had gone scrabbling in the dresser for the one thing in the cottage she thought might serve as proof of their honesty, which was a paper, much folded and brown at the creases. "We did ask, your worship, your grace. We did ask proper. The parson asked for us, written and all, and it weren't never our fault we was refused. Only vicar said, keep the paper by, keep it by in case." Honoria took the paper from the trembling red hands, because the woman was thrusting it at the Duke, and the Duke did not know what it was. She unfolded it to smooth it, to say something kind, to put it away. It was her father's hand. She would have known it anywhere, the cramped economical hand of a man who could not waste paper, the downstrokes worn thin where his pen had been mended too often. A petition on behalf of the cottagers of the Western Farms, Nettlecombe, for the repair of 3 roofs and a provision of coals against the winter, the families being in genuine and Christian want. Her father's words. Her father's pleading, careful, prideless words, set down in the cold by candle end so that other people might be warm. And across the foot of it, in a bold black ducal hand, that had never wanted for anything, an endorsement and a date from 4 winters gone, refused. We do not encourage the idle. The heat went out of the day. Honoria stood in the low doorway with the paper steady in her 2 hands and the blood loud in her ears, and she heard, very far off, the Duke asking the tranter girl whether the roof let in over the bed or over the hearth, gravely, kindly, as though he had never in his life set his name to a thing like this. We do not encourage the idle. Halloway's very words. Halloway's creed, in a hand that signed itself Ravenscar, 4 years old. 4 years. When this man before her had just come into his title, young and certain and at peace. She closed her fingers slowly over the brown creases. Miss Quail, the Duke had risen. He was looking at her across the dim little room, and the gravity in his face had sharpened to something else. What is it? You have gone quite white. What is the paper? And Honoria Quail, who had said quite a lot at his table and meant every word, found that for the first time in this house she did not know what her tongue might do if she unloosed it, and so she held it. And the holding tasted of ash, and she could not for her life have said whether she held it to spare him, or to spare herself the answer she was suddenly, sickeningly afraid he would give. Nothing, Your Grace, she heard herself say, and folded the paper small, and put it into the bosom of her gown, where the candlelight of a colder night had once not reached her hands. A receipt, an old receipt of my father's. It is nothing at all. Across the cottage his grey eyes rested on her, and she saw that he did not believe her, and she saw, too, that he would not press her here, in front of the frightened mother and the barefoot child. And the courtesy of that, the plain, decent restraint of it, was the cruelest thing he could have done, for it made her want to be wrong about the hand on the paper more than she had ever wanted anything, and she had not yet the least idea how she was to bear it if she was right. The road home from Nettlecombe ran straight into the westering sun, and the dust came up off the wheels in a long pale banner that hung in the still air behind them and would not settle. Honoria sat with the empty basket at her feet and the folded paper against her breast, where it lay no heavier than a pressed flower and weighed as much as the whole grey house ahead. The flannel was given out. The ham was given out. She had nothing now in her lap but her own 2 hands, and she watched them as though they belonged to some calmer woman who had not just put a lie into the mouth of a man who did not deserve to be lied to. You are very quiet, Miss Quail, said the Dowager Duchess from beneath her thundercloud parasol. I had thought, after last night, that quiet was a thing you had given up. I am tired, madam. The cottagers took it out of me. They took it out of all of us. My grandson has not said 6 words since the tranter woman's roof. The old woman's jet eyes slid sideways, slow and weighing, and yet you, who chatter to the poor as easily as breathing, came out of that last cottage white as a clout, and have not opened your lips since. The cottagers did not do that. Something in the cottagers did that. There is a difference, as you are so fond of telling Lord Halloway. The gig wheel struck a rut. Honoria's hand went to her breast before she could stop it, pressing the paper flat, and she saw the Dowager mark the gesture and file it away with the rest of the things that old woman missed nothing of. You have a sharp eye, madam. I have an old eye. It is the same thing, with the kindness worn off. The Dowager turned her face forward again. Keep your secret, child, if you must. Only know that a secret kept in this house is a coal kept in an apron. It will out, and it will burn the one who carried it before it burns anyone else. I have watched Crispin carry them 30 years. Look how warm he is. Ahead of them the Duke rode the tall grey at a walk, his back very straight, his head bent a little as though the air itself had a weight to it. He had not looked back at the gig since the church tower dropped behind the rise. Honoria fixed her eyes on the line of his shoulders in the dark coat, and thought of him crouched in the doorway speaking gravely to a barefoot child about a broken roof, kind, attentive, ashamed, and then thought of the bold black hand across the foot of her father's petition, the hand that had not wanted for anything, refused. We do not encourage the idle, and she could not make the 2 men sit in the same skin, and the trying of it made her feel ill in the swaying gig. "Madam," she said, very low. "How long has His Grace held the title?" 4 years this Michaelmas. His father went suddenly, a chill on the chest that turned, and was gone in a fortnight, and Gideon 8 and 20 named 4, and 20 in a black coat with a county on his shoulders, and no notion how to carry it. The parasol turned. "Why do you ask me that?" "No reason, madam. The cottagers put me in mind of years." "The cottagers put you in mind of something," said the Dowager Duchess, and it was not years. But she let it lie, and the gig rolled on into the long gold light, and the limes of Ravenscar came up at last over the fields, black against the glare, full of the evening's first starlings, and Honoria carried her coal up the avenue and into the house, and did not yet know what she meant to do with it. She knew only that she had to be certain. A hand could be mistaken. Grief and heat and a dim cottage could make a daughter see her father's loss written where it was not. Before she let the thing into her heart, she would put it to the proof, and the proof was in the library, in the long shelf of estate books the Duke had spread before her not 2 days since, with his own hands flat upon them. "These cottages are mine, and I have known it." She waited until the house was abbed. The library at midnight was a different country. The east windows that had held the morning now held nothing but the warm blue dark, and the smell of box drifting cool through the propped sash, and the candle she carried threw the shelves up tall and strange, and sank the corners into shadow. She set the light on the long table, and drew down the estate ledger for the year the old Duke went. The year the new one came, and turned the stiff pages until she found, entered in a clerk's round copperplate, the accounts of the Western farms. Rents, arrears, and here and there in the margin, where a decision had been wanted, the Duke's own initialing hand, brief and black and certain. Gr. approved. Gr. distrain. Gr. refused. She laid her father's petition beside the page. The same hand, the same worn-down strokes, the same hard bar to the R, the same black certainty that had never paused over what it cost. There was no mistaking it, and she had known, truly, that there would not be. She had only wanted the cottage to have lied to her. Refused. We do not encourage the idle. And the date at the foot, in his hand, the first winter of his rule, when he had scarce begun to learn the names, and had not troubled to. The candle flame stood up straight and unwavering in the still room. Somewhere in the wall a beetle ticked. Honoria stood with the 2 papers under her hand, and felt the last warmth of the day go out of her, and she understood that the man she had defended at his own table, the man who had said she is right, and meant it, the man who had made a poor jest on a dusty road to give her something to hold, that man had set his name to her father's harm, and forgotten he had done it, which was somehow the worst of all, that it had cost him so little he could not even remember the spending. You will strain your eyes, reading another man's accounts by one candle. She had not heard the door. Crispin Vane stood just within it, in a dressing gown of figured silk the colour of a dove's throat, a chamber stick in his hand, and his pale eyes went past her face to the table, to the open ledger, to the brown creased paper laid beside it, and she watched him read the whole of it in a single unhurried sweep, and arrive, ahead of her, at exactly where she stood. "Mr. Vane, I could not sleep. I came for a book. You came for a ledger," he said pleasantly, crossing the dim room with his candle, "and you found something in it that has frightened you. And you are a very poor liar for a clever woman, which I find I like. The accomplished ones tire me." He set his light beside hers, and the 2 flames leaned together, and he bent his bright head over the table without touching the papers. "Reading. Ah," he said softly. "Oh, that is a pretty thing. That is a very pretty thing indeed." He straightened, and the winter in his eyes had a kind of warmth in it now, the warmth of a man who has found money in the road. "Whose hand is the petition?" "My father's." Her voice came out steady. She did not know how. "Mr. Vane, and the endorsement is my cousin's. We do not encourage the idle." He said the words as though tasting a wine. How perfectly Halloway of him. How perfectly the thing you crucified poor Halloway for 4 nights running in the telling, set down in the saint's own hand before he was a saint. Crispin Vane smiled, and it was the first wholly sincere smile she had seen on him, and it was dreadful. My dear Miss Quail, do you know what you are holding? An old paper, a grief. Nothing that concerns you. It is the most concerning paper in 3 counties, and you know it, which is why you are white to the lips. He leaned a hip against the table, easy, golden, the silk falling in long folds, and dropped his voice to the confiding warmth that carried farther than a shout. Let me tell you what you are holding, since you will not. You are holding my cousin's conscience, in his own hand, with the date upon it. The whole of his new-found virtue, the cottages, the cutting of Halloway, the Jacobin sermons at the breakfast table, rests on the world believing he is a man who was always good and has only now found the nerve to show it. And here, in your 2 hands, is proof that 4 years gone he refused your own father a roof and a sack of coals in the very words Halloway used over the soup. We do not encourage the idle. Do you see it? The reformer is a hypocrite. The saint signed the sin. And the woman who unmasks him is the parson's own daughter, weeping over the paper. He spread his hands. It writes itself, Miss Quail. The postboys would carry it to London in a day. I am not going to unmask anyone. No, he agreed, watching her. Not yet. You are too freshly wounded to be useful. But you will think on it, lying up under your eaves, and you will remember that this house owes you nothing, and has given you nothing but a coddled egg and a great deal of risk. And you will begin to wonder what a clever woman of 3 gowns might do with a paper that powerful men would pay a very great deal to see, or to never see. He gathered his candle. I should pay a great deal myself, as it happens. The division sits in 3 weeks, and I find I cannot have my cousin standing up righteous in the wrong lobby, ruining sound investments for the warming of cottages. A paper like that, in the right hand, would make him biddable. He would do as he was bid, to keep it quiet. The pale eyes rested on her, mild as milk. Name your figure. I am not an ungenerous man to my friends, and you have so very few of those. Honoria folded the petition closed, slowly, and put it again into the bosom of her gown, and faced him across the leaning candles. My father walked into the sleet for those people, missed, vain, and asked men like you for their coals, and was refused, and went without his dinner that they might have his. He did not do it to be paid. I will not sell his pleading to bend a duke for your dividends, and I will not sell it to you to do anything at all, and if that is the only counsel you came down to the library at midnight to offer me, then I have had cheaper and better from the gardener. For a moment Crispin Vane did not move. Then he laughed, low and genuinely delighted, and made her a small bow over his chamber stick. What a waste, he said, that you were born to a vicarage and not a counting house. Very well, Miss Quail. Keep your father's pride and your 3 gowns, and we shall see how long the one feeds the other. He went to the door, and there he paused, the silk catching the light, and the warmth went out of his voice as cleanly as a snuffed wick. But understand me. You are now a woman who holds a thing that can ruin this family, and a woman who holds such a thing is never again merely a companion. You are a risk, or you are an ally. There is no third country. Sleep on which you would rather be, and remember that the easiest paper in the world to lose is a companion's character, and the easiest letter to write is the one to a cousin in Wells. He smiled once more, correct and cold. Good night. Mind the candle. And he was gone, and the door clicked, and Honoria stood alone in the great dark room, with the beetle ticking in the wall, and her father's words burning against her breastbone, and she understood that she had passed, somewhere in the last quarter hour, the place where the road forked, and there was no walking back to where she had been at dinner 4 nights since, certain and furious and clean. She did not sleep. When the first grey came in at the eaves, she rose and dressed and went down, not because she had decided anything, but because she could not lie still under the weight of deciding, and the one fixed point in the whole reeling business was that she would not let Crispin Vane be the one to tell the Duke. If the man was to be shown what his own hand had done, it should be by the daughter of the man it had done it to, plainly, without a witness, the way she had said the rest of it plainly, 4 nights gone. She owed her father that. She found to her own confusion. The Duke, that also. She found him in the library where the morning had come back, in his riding dress again, the papers of the Western farms spread before him, and a fresh list in his own hand. Tranter, roof, coombe, the eyes, the well at the cross to be dug deeper. The beginnings of the mending she had asked him to swear to. He looked up, and at the sight of her face he set down his pen and rose, and the gravity in him sharpened the way it had in the cottage doorway. "You did not sleep," he said, "and yesterday you put a paper into your gown and told me it was a receipt, and you are not a woman who lies easily, so it cost you something, and it has been costing you all night." He came round the table. "I said I would not press you in front of the child." "We are not in front of the child. Whatever it is, Miss Quail, let me have it. I have grown used, this week, to being told the truth by you. I find I cannot do without it now I have the taste." She took the petition from her breast. Her hands were perfectly steady. It was the rest of her that shook. She unfolded it and smoothed the worn creases on the table among his hopeful lists, and she turned it so that the foot of it faced him, and she stepped back. "It is my father's hand at the top, Your Grace," she said. "A petition for the Western cottages. For roofs and coals. Against a winter 4 years gone." She made herself say the rest of it level. "It is your hand at the bottom." She watched him read it. She watched the grey eyes go down the cramped, pleading lines of her father's writing and reach the bold black bar across the foot, and she watched the word refused go into him, and then the rest of it. "We do not encourage the idle," Halloway's creed in his own pen, and she saw the colour leave his face the way it had left hers in the cottage, all at once, from the brow down, until he stood there grey as the dawn, with the paper under his hand, and his jaw set hard against whatever was moving in him. He did not speak for a long time. The gardener's shears began somewhere out in the parterre. Snick, snick, patient and indifferent. "This is my hand," he said at last. Not a question. He would not insult her with a question. "I do not remember writing it. I want you to know that, not because it excuses anything, it excuses nothing, it makes it worse, but because it is the truth, and you are owed the truth." His finger touched the date. The first winter. "I signed whatever Pelham set before me in those years. Stacks of it, after dinner, by candle, while I learnt the title that had come to me too soon. He would put the day's business under my hand and tell me where to make my mark, and I made it, and I did not read. Because reading was slow, and there was so much of it, and I was 24 and certain that a careful agent knew his work." He lifted his eyes to her, and there was no defence in them at all, which was the hardest thing she had ever had to stand and look at. "Your father wrote to me, as a Christian man writes to one who might help him. And I, or my hand, which is the same thing, I will not hide behind the not reading. I sent it back to him, with Halloway's words on it. And I never knew his name, and he carried that refusal home in the cold, and 4 nights ago, I sat at my own table, and let you defend his memory, and did not know that the thing you defended it against was me." "Yes," said Honoria. The word came out of her like a stone dropped down a well. "You knew this in the cottage. You held it the whole way home. You sat in my grandmother's gig, with my name and my injury folded against your heart, and you said it was a receipt. To spare me." His voice was very low. "Why? Why in God's name would you spare me that?" And there it was, the question she had not been able to answer to herself through the whole white night, and she found she could not answer it to him either, not honestly. Because the honest answer was the one thing more dangerous than the paper, that she had wanted, fiercely, past all sense, for it not to be true, that the wanting had nothing to do with her father, and everything to do with the man who made poor jests on dusty roads to give her something to hold, and that a paid companion who let herself want that of a duke was a greater fool than any cottager who ever let a new roof rot. "I did not spare you, Your Grace," she said instead, and her voice was not quite steady now. "I spared myself. I did not wish to know whether you would say what you have just said honestly, without a single word of excuse, because I find that an honest hypocrite is far harder to forgive than a lying one, and I had rather you had lied to me. It would have been so much simpler to despise you." The shears stopped in the garden. In the quiet she heard him take a breath. "Then, despise me," he said. "It is the only thing my hand has earned of you, but do not, I beg you, take it back to Nettlecombe. Show it to me. Show it to my grandmother. Hang it on the chimney-piece where I shave, so that I never again forget what I am capable of forgetting. But let me mend the roofs first, before the village learns that the man come to mend them is the man who once would not. They have had enough of hopes raised and dropped. You told me so yourself. Let me be the proof of the new thing, before I am unmasked as the old." It was, she would think later, exactly the wrong and exactly the right thing for him to have said. Wrong. Because it asked her to keep the secret Crispin had told her to sell, to become the very risk or alley the cousin had named. Right. Because it was the only thing he could have asked that proved he had heard a word her father ever wrote. She opened her mouth, not knowing which of them was about to speak, and the library door opened without a knock. "How affecting," said Crispin Vane. He was dressed for the day now, in the dove grey, immaculate, the road dust of yesterday already a memory, and he came into the morning light with his easy, unhurried step and his pleasant smile, and behind him, hat in hand and pink with the heat of the road, stood Lord Holloway. The breath stopped in Honoria's throat. "I found his lordship putting up at the Cock," Crispin said, drawing off his gloves finger by finger, his pale eyes moving from the Duke's grey face to the paper open on the table to Honoria standing white beside it, taking the whole tableau in and finding it very much to his liking. He had got no farther than Marlbury before his physician's sea-bathing lost its charm against the prospect of an apology owed and an interest mended. "I told him my cousin had surely come to his senses overnight. I told him a Vane is never long a Jacobin." He smiled at the table, at the brown creased petition, lying full in the morning light, where any eye in the room might read the bold black hand across its foot. "But I see I have interrupted a family confidence. Forgive me. Pray, do go on. I am sure his lordship would be diverted to know what so absorbs the master of the house this fine morning, that he keeps a peer of the realm standing in his hall." Honoria's hand moved toward the paper. Crispin's voice, light as a feather and quick as a blade, stopped it. "I would leave it where it lies, Miss Quail. His lordship has come a long way to be reconciled. It would be a pity to deny him so very illuminating a document. Would it not, Gideon? When it speaks so exactly to the matter you and he have at issue. We do not encourage the idle." He let the words fall into the bright room and watched them strike. "I had it by heart from somewhere. I cannot for my life think where." The Duke had not moved. His hand still rested flat upon her father's petition, covering nothing. Too late to cover anything, and his grey eyes had come up to his cousin's pleasant face and stayed there, and Honoria saw in them, for the first time since she had entered the house, not the shut strongbox and not the latched door, but something open all the way to the floor, the look of a man who understands precisely how he has been delivered, and by whom, and that there is no lobby and no division and no goodwill left in the wide world that can buy back the next half-minute. Holloway, in the doorway, had begun to smile. The Duke of Ravenscar did not reach for the paper. He looked at it a moment, where it lay in the morning light, his own hand still flat beside it, and then he took it up himself, deliberately, in front of them all, lifted it the way a man lifts a thing he means to carry rather than hide, and turned it so that the bold black bar of the endorsement faced the door. "Come in, Lord Holloway," he said. "You should not stand in a draught. And you are quite right, Crispin. His lordship will be diverted. Pray, my lord, read it from there, or come nearer if your eyes want the help. It is my hand. I will spare everyone the suspense." Holloway came in, pink and pleased, his rings catching as he reached for his quizzing glass. Crispin had gone very still by the window, the gloves arrested in his fingers, and Honoria saw the smooth, pleasant face register, for one bare instant, that the scene was not unfolding along the line he had chalked for it. "It is a petition," the Duke said, his voice level as a ruled page, written 4 winters gone by the late vicar of Nettlecombe, asking me for the repair of 3 roofs and a provision of coals for families in genuine want. And across the foot of it, in my own hand, on a date I can read though I cannot remember the writing of it, I have answered him. Refused. We do not encourage the idle. He set it down again upon the table, gently, as though it might bruise. Your own words, my lord, to a syllable. I had them from you, it seems, before ever you said them over my soup. Or you had them from the air we both breathed in those years, when it was the fashion among comfortable men to mistake exhaustion for sloth. It does not signify which of us said it first. I said it. Here is the proof. Well, said Holloway, lowering the glass, and a slow, gratified smile spread over his broad face. Well, now there, you see, Ravenscar, you are not the Jacobin your cousin painted. Sound at bottom, like all your family. A man may have a moment of sentiment over a row of hovels and recover his sense by morning. We are none of us proof against a pretty speech at dinner. He glanced, indulgently, at Honoria. No offence to the young person. The young person held her tongue. She held it because her heart was going like a hammer, and she did not yet know what the Duke meant to do, and because she had learned, this strange week, the difference between the silence that is fear and the silence that is waiting. You misunderstand me, said the Duke. The smile on Holloway's face stayed a moment longer than the warmth behind it, the way a window holds the shape of a candle after the candle is carried out of the room. I do not show you this paper to be excused by it, the Duke went on. I show it to you because I am done being a man who is careful which papers are seen. 4 years ago I refused that petition. I refused it without reading it, which is worse, for it means I did not even trouble to know the harm I did. A good man went into the cold on the strength of my mark, and asked richer men for what I would not give, and went without his own dinner that children might be warm, and wore himself to nothing in the doing of it, and is gone this winter past. His eyes moved, once to Honoria, and away, sparing her the weight of being looked at while her father was spoken of. That is my hand. That is my doing. And I will not be reconciled to you over it, my lord, as though it were a youthful indiscretion we might laugh at between gentlemen. I will mend the roofs I refuse to mend. I will stand up in the wrong lobby, by your reckoning, and the right one by mine. And I will keep this paper where I shave, so that I never again forget that a careless mark made after dinner is paid for in another man's frost. The room was very quiet. Out in the parterre the shears had stopped. Holloway's colour had begun to mount, the saffron of his waistcoat seeming to climb into his face. You mean to tell me, he said, that you have shown me, a document of your own disgrace, in your own hall, and you expect me to? I expect nothing of you at all, said the Duke. That is the freedom of it. I find I have been expecting things of men like you for 4 years, my lord, and trimming myself to the getting of them, and it has made me a smaller man than my father, and a far smaller one than a country parson I never had the wit to read. I am finished with it. Bishop will have your coach brought round. The sea at Brighton will not wait, and neither, I think, will your patience with a house where the master tells the truth at his own expense. It was Crispin who broke first. He laughed, a short, light, incredulous sound, and laid the gloves down on the window-sill, with a precision that was its own kind of violence. Gideon, you magnificent fool. Do you understand what you have just done? You have handed your dishonour to the loosest tongue in the county, and asked him to carry it to Brighton, and to the lobby, and to London. By Friday se'nnight, every drawing-room from here to St. James's will know that the Duke of Ravenscar refused a starving parish in Holloway's own words, and is now playing the penitent over their graves to impress a companion with 3 gowns and a grievance. The pale eyes flicked to Honoria, and the warmth in them was the warmth of a man laying out cards he has held all evening. You cannot want that. Think, there is a quieter way. There is always a quieter way. The paper goes back into the dresser at Nettlecombe. The roof's amended without fanfare. You vote as the family needs you to vote in 3 weeks' time. And no one, no postboy, no drawing room, no scandal-loving baronet's wife, is ever the wiser. Discretion, cousin. It is the only coin that does not tarnish. You came down to the library at midnight, Honoria said, to make me the keeper of that quieter way. She had not meant to speak. She found she could not. This time, not. Crispin turned his bright head toward her, unhurried. I beg your pardon, Miss Quail? You found me with the ledger and the petition, and you knew at once what I held, and you offered to buy it of me, to bend his grace to your division with it, to make him biddable, you said, to keep it quiet. Her voice was steady now. It had found the place her father's voice went, talking down a frightened horse, talking up a stubborn creditor. You told me a companion's whole fortune is her character, and the easiest thing in the world to lose, and you named my mother's cousin in Wells, whom I had spoken of only once, at the table, because you wished me to understand that you could write a letter that would leave me without a roof of my own. You did not come to save his grace from his conscience, Mr. Vane. You came to put a price on his having one. Holloway's quizzing glass had stopped halfway to his eye. It is your money, Honoria went on, in those measures. I said so yesterday, and you did not deny it. You only admired me for it, which is a thing clever men do when they would rather not answer. You have lent, or you have bought, on the strength of the poor rates being cut, and if his grace stands up righteous, you are the poorer for it, not the family, not the name, your own pocket. And so you would mortgage a duke with a paper, and a parson's daughter with a letter, sooner than take the loss like an honest man. I think that is the whole of you in one sentence, sir. Your aunt told me you could be told in one. I did not believe her until this morning. Crispin Vane looked at her for a long moment, and the pleasant smile did not move, and behind it everything had gone to winter. How very eloquent, he said softly, for a woman about to be on the road. He drew breath to say more, his eyes already sliding past her to gather the weapon back into his hand. The letter. The cousin in Wells. The character that was the easiest thing in the world to lose. You will write no letter to Wells, Crispin, said the Dowager Duchess from the doorway. She stood there in grey morning silk, with the ebony cane held before her in both hands like a sceptre. And how long she had been there none of them knew. Which was, Honoria was learning, the old woman's whole art. Behind her hovered Bishop, grave and deaf and present. The Dowager came into the room without haste, the cane setting down its small hard punctuation upon the boards, and the morning light found the fine ruin of her face, and the dark unsoftened eyes that missed nothing, and never had. You will write no letter, she said again to Wells, nor to anyone, nor will you carry one word of this house's business to the Cock, or to Brighton, or to London, because, Crispin, you are going to be far too occupied for correspondence. I have had a letter myself. From Coutts. She let that sit. And another from a Mr. Sotherton, of Lincoln's Inn, who holds, it appears, a very great quantity of your paper, and who has been wondering aloud, to me, at some length. For I am an old woman, and men tell me things to pass the time, whether the security behind it is quite so sound as you have represented. Now that the measures it rests upon may not pass after all, he wonders whether to call it in. I have been advising him to wait. I find I could as easily advise him not to. Crispin Vane had gone the colour of the dove-grey he wore. Aunt, you forget nothing, Crispin, and that is your strength, said the Dowager, but you imagine that no one else remembers either, and that is your weakness, and it has been 30 years coming home to you. I remember your debts. I remember whose name you borrowed against before you had one worth the lending. I remember the boy who took the coals from the schoolroom grate in a hard winter and sold them, and let a housemaid be turned off for the theft, and smiled. The cane came down once. Hard. You will go up, and you will have Watkins pack your things, and you will be gone within the hour, and you will be exceedingly civil to me on your way out, because the only wall between you and Mr. Sotherton's patience is my goodwill, and I have so very little of it left for you that it would fit, I should think, into the bowl of a teaspoon. For a long moment Crispin did not move. The charm hung on him still, the golden surface of it, but underneath the cold, clever machinery had stopped, the way a clock stops when the spring is sprung, and Honoria watched him weigh the room and find no door in it, exactly as the Duke had been made to find no door an hour before, and she thought, so this is how it is done, when it is done to him. What a family, he said at last, very lightly, and made his aunt a bow of exquisite correctness, and gathered his gloves from the sill. At the door he paused, and turned, and the pale eyes went over the three of them, the old woman, the grey-faced Duke, the companion with her father's paper on the table, and the look in them was almost wondering. You will none of you be comfortable, you know. You have all of you chosen the harder thing, and the harder thing does not love you back. I shall be sorry to miss it. He smiled. Smile, Miss Quail. Hold your tongue. I make you a present of the advice. It is all I have left to give, and it cost me nothing. And he was gone, the dove grey vanishing down the bright hall, and the great front door, presently, opened and closed upon him. And that, more or less, was the end of Mr. Crispin Vane at Ravenscar. Lord Holloway found his coach already waiting, and went out to it sputtering of ingratitude and Jacobins, and the management of households, and the Duke saw him to it himself, bareheaded in the white noon, and bowed to him as correctly as if the dinner had ended in friendship, and wished him a calmer sea than he deserved, which Holloway took, to the last, for a courtesy. The wheels ground away down the avenue, raising their long pale banner of dust, and the limes closed green behind them, and the starlings, who cared nothing for any of it, came down upon the gravel where the carriage had stood. The Dowager Duchess outlasted them both by a quarter of an hour, sitting upright in the tall chair, while the house resettled around her, watching her grandson and the companion say nothing to one another, with the particular attention of a woman who has waited 40 years to be surprised, and means to enjoy it now it has come. Then she rose, in her whisper of grey silk, and took up her cane. I am going to lie down, she announced, for I have ruined a great nephew, and saved a duke, and breakfasted on nothing but vexation, and a woman of my years is entitled to her bed by noon if she has earned it. Gideon, you will not make a botch of the next half hour. I did not throw Crispin out into the heat to have you stand here like a fence post. She paused at the door, and her jet eyes came to rest on Honoria, slow and weighing, and the thing in them that Honoria had not been able to name 3 weeks since was nameable now, and it was something very like a blessing wearing the clothes of a threat. Miss Quail, you have said quite a lot in this house since you came to it, and every word of it has cost you something, and not one word has been wrong. Say a little more. I find the place improved by it. And she went out, and the cane's small punctuation faded up the stairs, and the library held only the morning, and the smell of box, and the two of them, and the paper on the table between. The Duke moved first. He went to the long windows and stood with his back to her, as he had stood at the dining-room window 4 nights since, looking out at the lime walk where the heat shimmered now above the gravel. The line of his shoulders in the dark riding coat was not straight any more. It had come down, somewhere in the last hour, into the shape of an ordinary man. I have been trying, he said, to think of the apology I owe you, and I find there is no shape large enough to hold it, and so I had better not attempt the whole at once. Let me begin at the nearest corner. He turned. The grey eyes were direct and undefended, and there was no strong box left in his face at all, nor any latched door, only a man, 28, who had been handed the keys too soon, and had just learned, very late, what the locks were for. I am sorry, Miss Quail, for your father. Not for the paper. The paper is a thing I will spend years mending, and it is right that I should. I am sorry for the man. I am sorry I never knew his name while he lived, and that I know it now only because his daughter sat at my table and would not let me be comfortable. He sounds to have been a far better gentleman than the one who refused him, and I would give a great deal to have shaken his hand and been ashamed to my face instead of behind it. Honoria found that her eyes had filled, and let them, because there was no one here to be improved by her composure, and she was very tired of holding it. "He would have liked you," she said. "That is the unbearable thing of it, Your Grace. He would have forgiven you inside the half-hour, and made you a cup of bad cider, and talked you into digging the well at the cross yourself, before you knew you had agreed to it. He had no gift for grievance. I have all the gift for it that he wanted, and I have spent it all this week, and I find I have none left over for you, which alarms me, because I came down those stairs this morning certain that I despised you. And now, she said, I do not, and it would be so much safer for me if I did." The shears began again, far off, snick, snick, patient and indifferent to the whole great matter of the human heart. "Safer," the Duke said. He came away from the window, slowly, and stopped a careful pace from her, the pace a man leaves who has learned at last to ask and not to order. "You used that word before, in the gig, when I made a poor jest to give you something to hold against the church tower. You said the understanding was more dangerous than the joke. I have thought about that a great deal, riding out before light, which I do now chiefly, because I cannot sleep for thinking of things you have said." A breath. "Miss Quail, I am going to say a thing that a duke ought not to say to his grandmother's companion, and I am going to say it badly, because I have spent 4 years saying only the things that were useful and I have lost the knack of the other kind. So, you must forgive the clumsiness, and attend to the meaning." "Your Grace." "Gideon," he said. "If it suits you, it does not signify if it does not. But I find I would rather you used my name, the way one uses a name for a person, and not a post, because the post refused your father, and the person would like very much to spend the rest of his life proving he is not the post." She could not speak. The thing in her chest had stopped being grief, and become something else entirely, something with a great deal of light in it, and no safety at all. "I have ordered you to smile and hold your tongue," he went on, "and you said quite a lot instead, and I agreed with every word, and I have gone on agreeing with you ever since. In the cottages, and on the road, and in this room, not an hour ago, when you took Crispin apart, with nothing but the truth, and 3 gowns. I did not know, when you walked into my dining room 3 weeks ago, that I had been waiting all my life to be contradicted. I know it now. I would be contradicted by you at every dinner I have left to eat. I am asking you, Honoria, clumsily, and at the worst possible moment, with your father's papers still on the table, and your eyes still wet, whether you would consent to do it not as my grandmother's companion, but as my wife." The word fell into the room the way she is right had fallen 4 nights since, a stone into still water, and the ripples of it went out and out. "You cannot," she said. "I am nobody. I own 3 gowns and a box of sermons. The county will say," "The county," said the Duke, "will say a very great deal, and most of it will be wrong, and all of it will be said whether you marry me or take the coach to Wells. My grandmother taught me that yesterday, in this house, and she is never mistaken twice." The ghost of the old uncomfortable smile, reaching all the way to his eyes now, easy at last. "Marry me, mend my parish with me. Keep my hand on the chimney-piece, and your tongue unbridled, and your father's prideless, careful bargaining at my elbow when the next Halloway comes to dinner. I am half-reformed, which you told me is the worst condition a man can be in, and the only cure for it is a woman certain enough for 2. I have looked for her 4 years and never knew it, and she was winding my grandmother's wool the whole time, despising me, and right too. And Honoria Quail, who had said quite a lot, and meant every word, found that the only word she had left was the one that mattered. "Yes," she said. "Gideon, yes." He crossed the careful pace between them, and took her 2 hands in his, and his were warm and wide, and the candlelight of no colder room would ever again fail to reach them. And he did not kiss her, not there, not over the ruin of her father's grief, but he bent his head until his brow rested against hers, which was somehow a great deal more, and they stood so, Two people who had each been holding their tongue for years, finally and dangerously heard. "I love you," she said, into the small, warm space between them, because her father had had no gift for withholding the true thing, and she found, to her relief, that she had inherited that of him too. "I think I have loved you since the dusty road, which is absurd, and since you said she is right, which is worse, and I shall hold it against you all my life that you made me feel it before I had even decided to like you." "I shall bear the grievance," said the Duke of Ravenscar, "as I bear all your others, with agreement." They were married in the autumn, when the limes had gone gold, and the first frost had silvered the parterre box. In the squat grey church at Nettlecombe, where Honoria had learnt her letters at the font, by a new young incumbent the Duke had put into the living, a man who begged coals shamelessly, and got them now without the asking. The cottages had their roofs before the wedding. The Duke had seen to that first, on the principle, which his wife had taught him, that one mends the thing before one celebrates the mender. The well at the cross was dug deeper, and the Duke had taken a turn at the digging himself, in his shirt-sleeves, to the scandal of 3 counties and the open delight of the Tranter children, who had decided that a Duke who would ruin his linen in their well was a person worth following about. Old Sarah Coombe, who could not see the rushes, was given a girl to plait for her and a fire that did not go out, and told everyone who would listen that the new Duchess had been a slip of a thing in the second pew once, and a great talker. And look at her now. The petition hung framed in the Duke's dressing room, where he shaved, in her father's cramped economical hand with its worn-down strokes and its bold black wound at the foot, refused, "We do not encourage the idle," and beneath it, in a newer hand, a single line the Duchess of Ravenscar had set there herself on the morning of her wedding, encouraged, at last, and not before time. He read it every day. He had asked her to leave it. It was, he said, the only inheritance her father had left them that wore as well as plate. It was the following July, a year, near enough, to the dinner, that the Dowager Duchess came down to the long drawing-room with the windows thrown open to the dusk and the green bruised scent of the lime walk drifting in at last on a real evening breeze, and found her granddaughter-in-law and her grandson at opposite ends of the supper table, with the monstrous silver epergne between them. Not fountaining, crusted with its silver grapes, exactly where it had always stood. "I had that hideous thing put away once," the Dowager observed, lowering herself into her chair, the ebony cane laid by. "Your grandfather's mother chose it. It has never once contradicted anyone. It is the only member of the household who has not," said the Duke gravely, and his wife laughed, and a moth came in at the open window and began its soft beating at the nearest candle, and Honoria reached out, without quite thinking, and cupped her hand about the flame, and guided the small blundering thing back out into the kind dark where it could do itself no harm. "There," she said, "not everything that flings itself at the fire need be let do it." "No," agreed her husband, watching her across the silver and the candlelight, with a face that had no strong-box left in it anywhere, and no door that was not standing open. "I have reason to know it. Smile, Duchess, and say quite a lot. I find I am still agreeing with every word." And she did, and he did, and the limes breathed their green breath into the warm room, and the old woman at the foot of the table closed her dark eyes a moment and let herself, for once in 40 years, be entirely content. If this story warmed the hour for you, stay a moment by the fire. Tell me in the comments which line you'd have spoken at that dinner, and whether you'd have held your tongue, or said quite a lot. Subscribe and sit with us again by candlelight, for there is always another tale waiting where this one ended.